The dream for many women in imperial China was to win the emperor's favor. But for every woman who ascended to glory, others faced the ultimate nightmare. For the women of China's imperial court, there was one fate worse than death. It was a punishment of absolute silence and of being completely forgotten. It was the sentence of being banished to a place known as the Legong, or the Cold Palace. You have probably seen it in historical dramas, a desolate, weed-choked courtyard where a once favored consort, now wrapped in rags, stares blankly at a locked gate. It is the end of the line, a prison of shame and despair, hidden within the glittering heart of the empire. What was it really like to be cast into this imperial prison? And was there any chance of coming back? The court of the Ming Dynasty gives us some unbelievable stories. It gives us the tale of a woman left to languish in solitude for 20 years until she finally went blind. And the legendary secret son, born and raised in the Cold Palace, who would one day become China's only monogamous emperor. Hey everyone, I'm Amy. In today's video, we're unlocking the gates to explore incredible true stories from the Ming Dynasty's Cold Palace. Let's begin with the name itself. Two simple words for centuries represented the ultimate fall from grace in imperial China. But here is the most crucial fact to understand. In the sprawling blueprint of the Forbidden City, or any palace before it, no building ever officially carried this name. There was no sign, no plaque, no map that designated a location as the Cold Palace. You would never find it on a map because the Cold Palace wasn't a specific place at all. It was a punishment. It was a social death sentence handed down to an imperial woman who had lost favor. It meant being stripped of your title, dignity, and your entire identity. Then locked away in whatever remote forgotten corner of the palace could serve as a prison. It was the emperor's way of making someone disappear without the mess of a public execution. So what could a woman do to deserve such a terrible fate? The reason a consort could be banished ranged from high treason to a simple personal slight. The most serious offense include interfering in politics or conspiring against the emperor, crimes that brought a sentence of lifelong confinement. Other grave sins were rooted in harem intrigue, using witchcraft against a rival, extreme jealousy that caused a public disturbance, or being accused of murdering another consort or an imperial child. But often, the reason was far more personal. A consort could be banished simply for offending the emperor or for losing his favor to a new, younger beauty. In these cases, a minor fault would be exaggerated, providing the perfect excuse to justify the banishment. So why would this unique punishment even exist? Why not simply execute a problematic consort or just banish her from the Forbidden City entirely? This answer lies in a cold political calculation of power, secrets, and reputation. Executing an empress or a high-ranking consort was a messy public affair. These women often came from powerful families whose political support the emperor needed. Killing their daughter could spark a dangerous backlash. At the same time, simply kicking her out of the palace was unthinkable. Ideologically, a woman who has served the emperor could never return to the outside world. And on a practical level, it was an even bigger risk. A discarded consort knew too many palace secrets. If she were to remarry or speak freely, she could expose embarrassing truth or state secrets that could harm the throne. The Cold Palace was the perfect, cruel solution. By imprisoning a woman within the palace walls, the emperor solved all his problems. He neutralized her as a threat without starting a war with her family. He contained all her secrets, ensuring they would never be leaked. This allowed the emperor to project an image of mercy. He could claim he had spared her life. Yet her bleak existence served as a powerful and constant warning to every other woman in the palace. And the story that became the blueprint for this punishment comes to us from the Han Dynasty, and it shows exactly how these forces come into play. It's the famous tale of Empress Chen Jiao, who came from an incredibly powerful family. Her mother had been instrumental in helping Emperor Wu secure the throne. and their marriage was a crucial political alliance. But this alliance came with two immense pressures. First, for over a decade, Empress Chen Jiao failed to produce a male heir, which was seen as her primary duty. Second, the emperor fell deeply in love with a new woman, a lowly singer named Wei Zifu, who soon bore him his first son. Suddenly, Empress Chen Jiao wasn't just a jealous wife, she was a political failure whose position was under threat. Consumed by desperation, Empress Chen Jiao took a drastic and foolish step. The historical records state that she was discovered to have hired a witch to perform two kinds of magic: love charms to win back the emperor's affection, and more seriously, curses aimed at her rival, Wei Zifu. When this plot was uncovered, it was the ultimate justification for her removal. Practicing this kind of witchcraft was not just a palace scandal, it was a dark art considered to be high treason. This gave Emperor Wu the perfect reason to act. It wasn't just a personal matter of him favoring a new consort anymore. It was now a matter of state security. For all her family's early support, her final fate was a life sentence of solitude. She was banished to the desolate Long Gate Palace. Her fate became the ultimate cautionary tale, creating the tragic template for this unique form of imperial punishment. A prison of shame, built to contain a woman who was too dangerous to kill and too valuable to set free. But the specific term cold palace did not yet exist. For centuries, these places were simply called a separate palace or a secluded chamber. The term cold palace appears to have first gained widespread popularity through the arts. In the Yuan dynasty, a new form of opera called zaju exploded in popularity. These plays loved dramatic stories of harem intrigues and needed a powerful term for the place where disgraced beauties were sent to wither away. Kind of reminds me of the C-dramas we watch today. The name they invented was the Cold Palace. It was poetic, tragic, and stuck. The cold in Cold Palace refers directly to the coldness of the emperor's heart. It signifies that his favor has been completely withdrawn. As a famous Chinese saying goes, a cold palace is not cold on its own. It is made cold by a person's indifference. From the theater, the term jumped into the real world and eventually into the history books. By the Ming Dynasty, we see the term cold palace formally appearing in official court histories. For example, historical texts like the History of Ming explicitly mention consorts being sent to the cold palace, cementing the term's journey from a theatrical phrase to a formal, recorded punishment. This name, born from art and solidified in history, was a perfect metaphor for the emperor's cold indifference. But what makes the term so enduring, so hauntingly precise, is that within the great palace of the Ming Dynasty, this metaphor would become a grim, literal reality. To survive Beijing's brutal winters, the Forbidden City was warmed by a complex underflooring heating system called Di Nuan. Furnaces pumped hot air through a network of flues, warming the very stones of the main halls and residences. It was a symbol of ultimate imperial luxury. But this life-giving warmth was reserved for the favored and the important. The remote courtyards, designated as a cold palace, were never connected to the system. They were left to the raw, biting cold, making the name a brutally accurate description of the suffering endured within. To understand life in the cold palace, we must first know where it was. Although there wasn't a building in the Forbidden City with a cold palace sign on its door, during the Ming Dynasty, a few locations became notorious for this grim purpose. The most well-known was the Anle Tang, or the Hall of Peace and Joy. The name is a crude joke, as this remote northern building was used to imprison disgraced or ill imperial women. Other isolated areas, like the Beisansuo, also served as these prisons within a palace. Sometimes, these palaces were also used for lifelong confinement of a deceased emperor's widows. You can learn more about that in my video about the fates of concubines after the emperor died. The moment a consort was banished to one of these places, her world, once as vast as the empire itself, shrank to a size of a single courtyard. This was not just a change of address, it was a sentence designed to make her completely disappear from the world. Every privilege and every human connection was systematically stripped away. Let's start with her wealth. A favored consort in the Ming court received a generous yearly stipend, often hundreds of taels of silver, along with vast quantities of fine silk and other luxuries. The moment she was condemned, all of it vanished. Her name was struck from the imperial payroll. She was no longer entitled to a single coin or a single thread of silk. She was now, in the eyes of the court's treasury, a non-person. Next, her attendants were taken away. A mid-rank consort might have dozens of personal servants. In the court palace, this entire support system was eliminated. She would be assigned one or two elderly eunuchs whose sole job was to be her keepers. They delivered her food, stood guard at the gate, and ensured she never communicated with the outside world. The women who once bathed her were gone. The eunuchs who once bowed to her were now her masters. This leads to one of the most agonizing rules. The ban on family visits was absolute. Her parents and siblings would never see her again. She was sealed off from everyone she had ever known. Her daily survival was a grim routine. The Directorate of Palace Delicacies, which once prepared fancy meals for her, now sent only scraps. Once a day, a eunuch would unbolt the gate and deliver a simple wooden tray. Inside would be food fit for a prisoner, a bowl of coarse rice and some pickled vegetables. Stories from the palace memoirs suggest that the eunuchs in charge would often intentionally let the food spoil as a petty act of cruelty. And leaving the palace was impossible. The confinement was absolute. Not for festivals, not for ceremonies, not even for the death of her own parents. This brings us to a fundamental question. What did these women do all day? Some were forced into manual labor. This wasn't like a modern prison camp designed for production. Its purpose was humiliation and control. Whether a woman was forced to work depended on several factors. A consort from a powerful family or a former empress might be spared the indignity, left only with the horror of isolation. A low-ranking woman or one who had committed a more severe offense might be forced to spin rough threads, wash coarse garments, or perform endless, basic embroidery. The decision often came down to the whim of the eunuchs in charge, who could impose labor as an additional punishment. So if they weren't working, how did they pass the time? Could they get supplies to paint or an instrument to play? The answer is a definitive no. The entire point of the court palace was to erase a woman's former identity, which was often tied to her artistic talents. Providing her with a brush and ink or a musical instrument would be allowing her an escape and a way to preserve her sense of self, which was the opposite of the punishment's goal. Could a loyal friend or family member send things to them? Officially, this was strictly forbidden. Allowing gifts would create a channel for communication, bribery, and potential conspiracy. However, the unofficial reality of the Forbidden City was that everything ran on silver and connections. It is possible that an incredibly loyal and brave eunuch, for a very high bribe, might risk his own life to smuggle in a small item, perhaps a special food or a warm blanket. But this would have been exceptionally rare and dangerous. For nearly every woman, there was no contact, no gifts, and no comfort from the outside world. So they had to invent their own routines to stay sane. A woman might spend hours meticulously cleaning her small, damp room, a futile attempt to maintain order in a life of chaos. She might tend to a small, pathetic patch of weeds in the courtyard, desperate to nurture any form of life. Religious devotion was a common solace. Many would spend their days chanting Buddhist scriptures. The repetitive sounds gave comfort in the profound silence. Others would try to preserve a piece of who they were, humming old songs until they forgot the words, or tracing the characters of long-lost poems in the dust with a broken twig. For every woman who fought to keep her mind intact, another would succumb to despair. spending her days weeping, talking to herself, or simply staring at a wall as her identity slowly faded away. The rules of the Cold Palace were one thing, but what did it actually feel like to be erased? To understand that, you need to hear the true story of a woman named Lady Wang. Her story shows exactly how a woman's life could be stolen, not with a sword, but with silence. Her story begins in the court of Emperor Wan Li, who ruled for a very long time. Behind the palace's golden walls, his court was a mess of drama and intrigue. One day, the young emperor had a brief, regrettable encounter with a palace maid, a woman with the surname Wang. Soon after, he learned she was pregnant. She gave birth to his first son, Zhu Changluo. According to 1,000 years of tradition, this should have been great news. The firstborn son was supposed to be the next emperor, securing the dynasty's future. As the mother of the emperor's only heir, Lady Wang was promoted to reverend consort. This promotion was a cold formality forced upon the reluctant emperor by the empress dowager after he tried to deny paternity. A few years later, the emperor's eye turned to a new woman, noble consort Zhen, who quickly became his favorite, and he wanted her son to inherit the throne. The emperor couldn't just make his first son disappear, so he aimed his resentment at the boy's mother. Reverend Consort Wang was sent to live in the remote Jingyang Palace. And just like that, this grand building became her personal cold palace. The gates weren't always chained, but they didn't need to be. The emperor simply never visited. For years, which then blended into decades, she was left there, totally alone. Life in Jingyang Palace was a checklist of all the punishments we just talked about. The generous salary given to the mother of a prince, it never came. The dozens of servants she should have had, they were replaced by a few guards. Her son, the prince, was also ignored and lived in constant fear. He was almost never allowed to see his own mother. For over 20 years, Reverend Consort Wang wasted away in her lonely palace. It's written that she spent all her time weeping over her fate and the son she couldn't raise. Eventually, she cried so much that she went completely blind. Finally, after decades of fighting with his government officials, the emperor gave in and named her son the official crown prince. Years later, after her son had a son of his own, she was granted a stunning promotion to the highest rank of imperial noble consort, a title granted out of political necessity, not personal affection. But this was no happy ending for her. She was still in her cold palace, still forgotten. It was only when she lay dying that her son begged his father to let him see her one last time. He ran to her palace and found a woman who had given him life, now an old, frail, blind woman. In one of history's most heartbreaking moments, she reached out to feel the face of the grown man she hadn't seen since he was a boy. According to the history of Ming, Imperial Noble Consort Wang said to her son, "My son has grown so big, I can die without any regrets." She died soon after. Her story is the ultimate tragedy of the Cold Palace. She wasn't a political schemer, and she wasn't accused of any crime. Her only fault was having the wrong son at the wrong time. For that, she paid with many years of her life, a long, lonely sentence in a prison made of indifference. For nearly every woman sent to the Cold Palace, the story ended in quiet, forgotten despair. The locked gates were a symbol of finality. But was there ever a chance of escape? Could a woman, once erased, ever return to the world? Usually no, but there were exceptions. And in the Ming Dynasty, there was one legendary story. It is the story of a secret son born and raised inside the Cold Palace system, who would one day emerge to become the only monogamous emperor in Chinese history. This story begins with Emperor Chen Hua. He was completely under the thumb of his favorite consort, the ruthless noble consort Wan. She was years older than the emperor, but her power over him was absolute. Terrified of any rival, she ensured that any other consort who became pregnant would suffer an accident. The emperor was aging, and thanks to noble consort Wan, he remained childless. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a looming crisis for the empire, which faced a chaotic and bloody succession battle if the emperor died without a direct heir. One day, the emperor had a chance encounter with a low-ranking palace woman with the surname Ji. When she discovered she was pregnant, she knew it was a death sentence. But a conspiracy of defiance formed around her. A group of loyal eunuchs, and even the deposed Empress Wu, who herself was living in a form of cold palace, conspired to hide the pregnancy. They secretly moved Lady Ji to the dreaded Anle Tang, the isolated hall for the sick and disgraced. Inside this cold palace, hidden from the murderous eyes of the noble consort Wan, she gave birth to a son, Zhu Youchen. For 6 years, this prince of the Ming dynasty was raised in absolute secrecy inside a prison. He was fed on scraps smuggled in by loyal eunuchs. He never saw the sun and had to be kept in secret, constantly living in the shadow of discovery and death. He spent his entire childhood inside the cold palace. The story comes to a head when Emperor Chen Hua, now in his late 30s, was staring into a mirror, mourning the fact that he was old and had no heir to carry on the dynasty. A brave eunuch beside him decides to risk everything. He threw himself to the floor and revealed the secret. "Your Majesty has a son. He has been hidden away and is now 6 years old." The stunned emperor demanded to see the boy. Zhu Youchen was brought before his father for the first time. Having grown up in darkness and fear, the boy was terrified. According to the history of Ming, his hair was so long it touched the ground. The emperor, seeing the son he never knew, wept and immediately declared him the crown prince. For the boy's mother, this was her grand revival. Lady Ji was brought out of the cold palace and officially granted the title of pure consort. But the story has one last tragic twist. Shortly after being rescued, the newly named pure consort Ji died suddenly and mysteriously in her new palace. It was widely believed she was poisoned by the enraged noble consort Wan. Was it truly a revival? For pure consort Ji, it was tragically brief. But her son, Prince Zhu Youchen, survived against all odds. He grew up to become Emperor Hongzhi, and his reign is remembered by historians as the Hongzhi Restoration, a rare era of peace, diligent government, and prosperity. He was indeed one of the most capable rulers of the Ming dynasty. Haunted by his traumatic childhood, seeing firsthand how the vicious harem politics led to his mother's tragic fate, Emperor Hongzhi did something unprecedented. He broke with thousands of years of tradition and refused to take a single concubine. Devoted to his wife, Empress Zhang, he remains the only truly monogamous emperor in all of Chinese history. But this beautiful, romantic legacy had an unexpected ripple effect on the dynasty. His devotion to one wife created an environment of unprecedented stability for his heir. Unlike Emperor Hongzhi, who grew up in constant fear, his only surviving son grew up as the undisputed and cherished successor, with no rivals and no struggle for the throne. While the Ming dynasty's official rule was that the throne passed down to the eldest son, this rarely guaranteed a safe path to power. The emperor always had the last word and could depose a crown prince in favor of a more favored son or a son from a more beloved consort. In addition, powerful relatives of a young or new emperor would often try to take power, either through political influence or even directly through military force. Emperor Hongzhi's son faced none of these challenges. Sheltered from any real hardship, he grew up to become the infamous Emperor Zheng. Instead of focusing on his imperial duties, he treated the throne as his personal playground, frequently abandoning the court and allowing corrupt eunuchs to seize power in his absence. His incompetent and irresponsible reign would mark the beginning of the Ming dynasty's steep decline. This story is the Cold Palace's greatest paradox. A place designed to erase legacies ended up creating the most unique one in Chinese history. The Cold Palace of the Ming dynasty was ultimately a world of profound contradictions. It was a prison hidden within a paradise, a place of absolute silence in the heart of the bustling court, a punishment of slow psychological destruction that stood in the shadow of the world's most absolute power. What do you think was the true punishment of the Cold Palace? Was it the physical hardship, or was it the psychological torture of total isolation? Considering the story of Emperor Hongzhi, who was born from this system, is it ever possible to truly escape the trauma of the past? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support this channel and help me uncover more fascinating stories from Chinese history, please check out my membership and become a Noble Baobab. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Stay curious, stay magical.